Zethric stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of his flagship. The blue and green planet rotated slowly in front of him, looking peaceful and harmless. Earth, they called it. The third planet from a yellow star in. A system the humans numbered as Sol, to Zethric. It looked like every other world the Valonian Empire had conquered in the past 50 cycles. "Commander, the intelligence reports are complete," said his tactical officer Vorthak. The younger Valonian's cybernetic eye glowed as he accessed the data streams. The species calls themselves humans. They are divided into nearly 200 separate nations. Their technology is primitive. They still use chemical rockets for space travel and projectile weapons for warfare. Zethric nodded, his scarred face showing no emotion. His own cybernetic implants hummed softly as they processed the information. This would be his 43rd conquest. 42 worlds had fallen before the might of the Valonian fleet. This small blue planet would be no different. Population? Zethric asked. Approximately 8 billion individuals. They seem to breed rapidly but die young. Average lifespan is less than 100 of their years, Vorthak replied. They waste enormous resources on internal conflicts. Our scans show active warfare in 17 different regions. Good. A divided species is a weak species. Zethric turned to face his bridge crew. 20 Valonian warriors, each enhanced with cybernetic implants, each a veteran of multiple campaigns. How long did it take us to subdue the Catherian collective? 6 days, Commander, came the reply from his weapons officer. The Nexari Federation? 4 days. And they had energy shields and plasma weapons? Zethric looked back at the hologram of Earth. These humans have neither. They fight with metal projectiles and chemical explosives. I estimate 3 days for complete surrender. The bridge crew made sounds of agreement. 3 days seemed generous for such a primitive species. Zethric had conquered advanced civilizations in less time. "Deploy the fleet," Zethric commanded. "Standard formation. Orbital bombardment platforms take positions over their major population centers. Ground assault ships prepare for planetary insertion. We begin at their dawn." The Valonian fleet moved like a pack of predators. 50 ships of various sizes approached Earth from the dark side, their stealth systems making them invisible to human detection. Each ship bristled with weapons that could level cities. Each carried warriors bred for conquest. Zethric watched from his command chair as the fleet took positions. His flagship, the Devastator, positioned itself over the continent the humans called North America. Through the massive viewports, he could see the lights of human cities twinkling like stars below. "Pathetic," he muttered. "They leave their cities illuminated like beacons. They have no idea we are here." The tactical display showed Valonian ships moving into position over every major human population center. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow. The names meant nothing to Zethric. Soon they would be ruins or Valonian administrative centers. "All ships report ready, Commander," Vorthak announced. Zethric stood and walked to the main display. Earth rotated beneath them, unaware that its fate was about to change forever. In a few hours, the sun would rise over the eastern coast of North America. The humans would wake to find their world under siege. Signal all ships. Attack begins at sunrise over the primary target zone. Standard intimidation protocol. Destroy military installations first, then government centers. Leave civilian populations intact for processing. The hours passed slowly. Zethric had done this so many times before. First came the shock of orbital bombardment, then the fear as ground forces landed. Finally, the inevitable surrender as the conquered species realized resistance was futile. It was always the same pattern as dawn approached over the North American continent. Zethric activated the fleet-wide communication system. His scarred face appeared on screens throughout the Valonian fleet. "Warriors of the Empire," he began, his voice carrying the authority of dozens of victories. "Today we claim another world for our people. The species below is primitive and divided. They have no energy weapons, no shields, no unity. This will be swift and decisive. Show them the power of the Valonian Empire." The first plasma beams lanced down from orbit as the sun touched the horizon. Military bases erupted in brilliant flashes of light. Airports became craters of molten metal. Communication centers vanished in clouds of superheated gas. Zethrak watched the destruction with satisfaction. The humans' primitive radar systems had detected nothing until the first shots were fired. By then it was far too late. Ground assault. Teams, deploy, he ordered. Hundreds of Valonian dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling meteors. Each carried a squad of cybernetically enhanced warriors armed with plasma rifles and energy shields. They would secure key locations while the orbital bombardment continued, but something was wrong. Zethrak frowned as he watched the tactical displays. The human military response was not following the expected pattern. Instead of centralizing their forces for a desperate last stand, they were scattering. Instead of trying to negotiate surrender, they were fighting back. "Commander," Vorthak called out, his voice uncertain. "The humans are not responding as predicted." On the main screen, footage from the dropships showed something unprecedented. As Valonian warriors advanced through the smoking ruins of a human military base, small groups of humans emerged from hidden positions. They carried primitive kinetic weapons, but they were using them with deadly effectiveness. One group of humans had positioned themselves in a building overlooking a landing zone. As Valonian dropships touched down, the humans opened fire. Their bullets could not penetrate Valonian armor, but they were aiming for the joints, the weak points, the sensor arrays. "Impossible," Zethrak muttered. "How do they know our armor?" "Specifications?" But it got stranger. A human soldier, wounded and clearly dying, crawled toward a landed dropship carrying an explosive device. The Valonian warriors saw him coming but assumed he was fleeing. Instead, he detonated the device at the ship's fuel line, destroying the vessel and killing 6 Valonian warriors. "Commander, we are receiving reports from all ground teams," Vorthak said, his cybernetic eye flickering rapidly. "The humans are not surrendering, they are fighting to the death." Zethrak had never encountered this before. Every species the Valonians had conquered understood the logic of surrender when faced with superior force. It was simply practical. Fight until defeat becomes inevitable, then surrender to preserve what life remained. But these humans seemed to lack that basic survival instinct. The tactical display showed more disturbing reports. In the city called New York, a human operating some kind of rescue vehicle was driving directly into areas under orbital bombardment. He was pulling other humans from collapsed buildings, ignoring the plasma beams falling around him like deadly rain. In another location, a human pilot whose aircraft had been damaged by Valonian fighters was not ejecting to safety. Instead, she was steering her burning machine directly toward a Valonian command ship. "Get me a direct link to that fighter," Zethrak ordered. The screen flickered, showing the interior of the human aircraft. The pilot was young, female, bleeding from wounds across her face. Her primitive aircraft was coming apart around her, but her hands remained steady on the controls. "Human pilot," Zethrak transmitted, "your aircraft is destroyed. Eject now, and you will be spared." The human pilot looked directly into the camera. Her eyes held no fear, no hatred, no desperation. They held something Zethrak had never seen in a conquered species: absolute determination. "Go to hell," she said simply. Her fighter struck the Valonian command ship 3 seconds later. Zethrak stared at the explosion blooming on his tactical display. A primitive human aircraft, built with metal and chemical fuel, had just destroyed a Valonian warship protected by energy shields and ablative armor. "How?" he whispered. The answer came from his sensors officer. "She overloaded her aircraft's fuel system and flew directly into our shield generator. The explosion occurred inside our defensive perimeter." For the first time in his military career, Zethrak felt something cold settle in his stomach. These humans were not fighting like any species he had encountered before. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to hurt the invaders, even if it cost them everything. The orbital bombardment continued, but the reports from ground teams grew more troubling by the hour. The humans were adapting faster than any conquered species in Valonian history. They were studying fallen warriors, reverse engineering captured equipment, coordinating resistance across vast distances. Despite having their communication networks destroyed, and they kept fighting as the first day of what should have been a 3-day conquest drew to a close. Zethric stood before his tactical display and realized something that chilled him more than the coldness of space. These humans were not going to surrender. They were going to make the Valonians pay for every meter of ground, every building, every life. They would turn their entire world into a battlefield before they accepted defeat. And somehow, impossibly, Zethric was beginning to suspect that might be enough. 3 weeks had passed since the invasion began, and Zethric could no longer sleep properly. The regeneration chambers that normally restored his body and mind now felt like prisons where images of human resistance played endlessly behind his closed eyes. What should have been a simple conquest had become something else entirely, something that made his veteran warriors speak in hushed voices. The war room aboard his flagship buzzed with activity as reports streamed in from across the planet. Each update brought news that challenged everything the Valonians knew about warfare and conquest. These humans refused to follow any logical pattern of behavior. "Commander, the resistance cell in the Colorado Mountains has struck again," reported Lieutenant Gorvac, his cybernetic implants glowing as he processed incoming data. They destroyed another supply convoy using improvised explosive devices. Zethric studied the tactical display showing the mountainous region. A group of young humans, barely more than children by Valonian standards, had been conducting guerrilla operations for 2 weeks. Their leader was identified as Danny Rodriguez, a 17-year-old who should have been attending educational facilities instead of building bombs from household chemicals. "How many warriors did we lose?" Zethric asked. 12 dead, 18 wounded. The humans used a combination of traditional explosives and some kind of chemical mixture that burned through our armor plating. 12 warriors lost to children with homemade bombs. Each Valonian warrior represented decades of training and cybernetic enhancement worth more than most planets produced in a year. Yet these human youngsters were picking them off with devices built in basements and garages. "Send a full battalion to eliminate them," Zethric ordered. "Sir, we already sent 2 battalions. The humans disappeared into tunnel systems they carved through the mountains. Our heavy equipment cannot follow them into such confined spaces." Zethric clenched his fists. The humans were using their own planet against the invaders, turning every cave, every building, every piece of terrain into a weapon. They fought like the very ground itself was their ally. Another report arrived from the ruins of Chicago. A human named Carol Stevens, who had worked with numbers and data before the invasion, was now coordinating underground networks that seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts. She had somehow learned to hack into Valonian communication systems using their own captured equipment. How is this possible? Zethric demanded. "Our encryption protocols are military-grade, designed by the finest technicians in the Empire. The human appears to understand our systems better than we do," came the reply from his communications officer. "She is feeding false information into our tactical networks. 3 ambushes this week were caused by incorrect intelligence that she planted in our systems. The most disturbing reports came from the battlefield itself. Valonian warriors, bred for conquest and enhanced with cybernetic implants, were beginning to show signs of what human military documents called battle fatigue. This was a condition that had never appeared in Valonian forces before. Warrior after warrior reported the same phenomenon. They would enter combat expecting to face desperate, frightened enemies seeking mercy. Instead, they encountered humans who fought with such ferocity and determination that even veteran Valonians began to hesitate before engaging. A Marine named Tony Lopez had become legendary among both sides. During the siege of a human military installation, he had carried 3 wounded civilians through 2 miles of active combat zone. Valonian snipers had clear shots at him multiple times, but something about his single-minded determination to save those under his protection made them hesitate just long enough for him to disappear into cover. Our warriors report that engaging. These humans is unlike any previous campaign, said Vorthek, reviewing psychological assessments. They describe feeling something they call reluctance to fire on opponents who show such dedication to protecting others. Zethric had no words for this. Velonian warriors were conditioned from birth to feel no mercy, no hesitation, no doubt. Yet somehow, these humans were inspiring something that resembled respect even among their enemies. The tactical situation grew worse daily. Kevin Brooks, a human who had designed software systems before the war, had accomplished something that Velonian military experts deemed impossible. He had reverse-engineered captured Velonian technology and integrated it with human computer systems. The hybrid networks he created could not be tracked or infiltrated by standard Velonian methods. He is coordinating resistance activities across multiple continents simultaneously, reported the intelligence officer. Our signal intercepts show he has established contact between human forces in Asia, Europe, and North America. They are sharing tactical information and coordinating strikes against our forces. What made this even more impossible was the speed of human adaptation. Where other conquered species required years to understand alien technology, humans were modifying captured Velonian equipment within days. They stripped plasma rifles for power cells, converted communication devices into jamming equipment, and somehow figured out how to use Velonian medical technology to treat their wounded. The most unsettling aspect was how humans treated their casualties. Every other species the Velonians had conquered understood the practical necessity of abandoning the wounded when faced with superior force. It was simple survival logic. Save those who could still fight, rather than risk everyone for those who could not. But humans seemed incapable of this rational thinking. Time after time, Velonian forces witnessed humans risking everything to recover their fallen comrades. They would charge through plasma fire, ignore tactical advantages, and sacrifice strategic positions just to prevent their wounded from falling into enemy hands. A firefighter named Jake Morrison had become something of a legend among the Velonian forces. During the bombardment of New York, he had continued pulling survivors from collapsed buildings even as Velonian ground forces advanced through the streets. Plasma beams fell around him like deadly rain, but he never stopped working. Velonian warriors reported seeing him carrying injured humans to safety while his own building burned behind him. Why do they do this? Zethric asked his staff during one of their daily briefings. They could retreat, regroup, save more lives by preserving their fighting strength. Instead, they throw away tactical advantages to save individuals who may not survive anyway. None of his officers had an answer. This behavior was so far outside Velonian understanding that they had no framework for analyzing it. The breaking point came during what became known as the Defense of Seattle. A mixed group of human military personnel and civilians had fortified a section of the city around a hospital complex. Velonian forces surrounded the position and offered standard surrender terms: lay down weapons and submit to processing, and civilian casualties would be minimized. The humans responded by increasing their rate of fire. For 6 days, Velonian forces tried to take the hospital complex. Every assault was met with desperate resistance. Humans with no military training fought alongside veteran soldiers. Doctors operated on wounded fighters while plasma beams cut through the walls around them. Nurses distributed ammunition between treating patients. On the 7th day, Zethric decided to end the siege with orbital bombardment. As his weapon systems locked onto the hospital complex, he received an unexpected transmission from the human commander. The screen showed a middle-aged human woman in a torn medical uniform. Behind her, Zethric could see wounded humans lying on makeshift beds while others continued fighting at the windows. "This is Dr. Susan Mills," the woman said calmly. "We know you are about to destroy this facility. We want you to understand something before you do." Zethric almost cut the transmission, but something in the woman's voice made him listen. "We could have evacuated yesterday," she continued. "We had clear escape routes to the south. We stayed because there are people here who cannot be moved. Children with severe injuries. Elderly patients on life support. We will not abandon them. The transmission showed the interior of the hospital. Human defenders were digging fighting positions between beds of wounded civilians. Medical staff continued treating patients while explosions shook the building around them. "You can kill us all," Dr. Mills said, "but you cannot make us leave them behind." Zethric stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he canceled the orbital bombardment order. He told himself it was a tactical decision. The hospital could be taken by ground forces with minimal additional casualties. But deep in his mind, where his warrior conditioning could not reach, he knew the truth. He could not bring himself to destroy people who loved each other that much. That night, for the first time since the invasion began, Zethric found himself unable to enter his regeneration cycle. His mind would not rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw human faces filled not with fear or hatred, but with an unbreakable determination to protect those they loved. Something was changing in Zethric, something that frightened him more than any battlefield he had ever walked. These humans were not just resisting conquest. They were teaching him things about courage and sacrifice that the Valonian Empire had never understood, and he was beginning to suspect that this war would change him in ways that victory never could. 6 months into what should have been a 3-day conquest, Zethric stood in his private quarters staring at the tactical reports that covered every surface. Red markers indicated Valonian losses. Blue showed human positions. The blue was spreading like a disease across every continent, while the red seemed to shrink daily. The impossible was happening. The Valonian Empire was losing doubt, not losing in the traditional sense where superior numbers or technology overwhelmed them. They were losing because humans had done something no other species had ever accomplished. They had made the Valonians afraid to fight them.Zethrac's personal communication device chimed with an urgent message from the High Command. The holographic image of Supreme Commander Vortex appeared, his scarred face showing the displeasure that had destroyed entire star systems. "Commander Zethric explained to me how a primitive species with chemical weapons has held off the finest military force in the galaxy for 6 months. Zethric straightened his shoulders, calling upon decades of military discipline. "Supreme Commander, the humans do not fight according to any known tactical doctrine. They have proven highly adaptive and willing to accept casualties that would break any rational military force." "Are you telling me that you cannot defeat a species that fights with metal projectiles and explosive chemicals?" "No, sir. I am telling you that defeating them may cost more than the Empire is prepared to sacrifice." The silence that followed stretched longer than the space between stars. Supreme Commander Vortex had conquered more worlds than any other Valonian in history. The concept of acceptable losses was foreign to his experience. "You will receive reinforcements within the month. End this war, Commander. The Empire does not accept failure." The transmission ended, leaving Zethric alone with reports that painted a picture of systematic Valonian breakdown. 3 orbital platforms had been destroyed by human fighters using captured Valonian technology. Ground forces were requesting transfers off-world at unprecedented rates. Even his most veteran warriors spoke in whispers about the humans who fought like demons and died like heroes. The breakthrough came from an intelligence report marked with highest priority. A human engineer named Rick Mason had successfully integrated captured Valonian propulsion systems with human navigation technology. The hybrid fighters that resulted moved in patterns that no Valonian pilot could predict or counter. "This is impossible," Zethric muttered as he studied the technical specifications. "Their computer systems are centuries behind ours. They should not be able to interface with our technology." But the evidence was undeniable. Human pilots flying. These hybrid craft had destroyed more Valonian ships in the past month than the previous 5 months combined. They flew with a recklessness that bordered on suicide, using their knowledge of human physics to pull maneuvers that should have killed them. The turning point came during what military historians would later call the Battle of the Pacific Fleet. Colonel Amy Turner, a human military officer who had somehow survived the initial orbital bombardment, coordinated a counterattack that changed everything. See if Rack watched in real time as human forces launched what appeared to be a desperate assault on 3 Valonian orbital platforms simultaneously. The attack used captured Valonian fighters modified with human technology, supported by primitive human aircraft that should have been destroyed within minutes. "They are committing suicide," observed Vorthak from the tactical station. "Those, platforms have enough firepower to vaporize their entire attack force." But the humans were not committing suicide. They were doing something far more dangerous. They were thinking the first wave of human fighters drew the attention of Valonian defenses, absorbing massive amounts of plasma fire while accomplishing seemingly nothing. The second wave appeared to be reinforcements, flying in predictable patterns that made them easy targets for Valonian gunners. The third wave changed everything. Lieutenant Ben Parker, flying a hybrid fighter of Rick Mason's design, led a formation of 12 aircraft in an attack pattern that defied everything Valonians understood about space combat. Instead of approaching the orbital platforms directly, they used the gravitational field of Earth itself as a weapon. "What are they doing?" Zethric demanded as he watched the tactical display. The answer came in the form of destruction that seemed to violate the laws of physics. The human fighters had somehow calculated a trajectory that used Earth's gravity well to accelerate their approach beyond anything Valonian targeting systems could track. They struck the orbital platforms at relative velocities that turned their small craft into kinetic weapons of devastating power. All 3 platforms were destroyed within minutes. "Impossible," whispered Vorthak. "Those calculations would require computational power we do not possess." But humans had not used computational power. They had used something far more dangerous, intuition combined with desperate creativity. Pilots, who grew up understanding how gravity worked on their homeworld, had simply applied that knowledge to 3-dimensional space combat. The loss of the orbital platforms triggered a cascade of tactical failures that Zethric watched with growing horror. Human resistance groups, coordinated by Kevin Brooks through his hybrid communication networks, launched simultaneous attacks across 6 continents. Every Valonian installation came under assault at the same moment. The humans had learned the most important lesson of warfare, timing, but the worst was yet to come. During the evacuation of a damaged Valonian command ship,Zethrac's personal shuttle was forced to make an emergency landing in what human forces called the Pacific Northwest. The shuttle systems failed completely, leaving Zethrac and 6 of his elite warriors stranded in a forest that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The humans found them. Within hours, Zethrac had expected immediate execution or torture. Instead, he found himself facing something that challenged his understanding of warfare itself. The human patrol was led by a soldier named Gary Phillips, a man whose personnel file indicated he had lost his entire family during the initial orbital bombardment. "Drop your weapons," Phillips ordered, his primitive projectile rifle trained onZethrac's chest. The Valonian warriors reached for their plasma rifles, but Zethrac raised his hand to stop them. Something in the human's eyes warned him that this moment was more important than any tactical advantage. "We are armed and outnumber you," Zethrac said carefully. "You cannot defeat us in open combat." "Maybe not," Phillips replied. "But I can make sure you don't walk away from this forest." The standoff lasted for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Zethric studied the human soldier, noting the controlled anger in his expression, the steady hands that held his weapon, the complete absence of fear despite facing opponents with superior technology and training. "You lost family in our attacks?" Zethric observed. "Everyone I ever loved," Phillips confirmed. "Wife, 2 daughters, my parents. Your ships burned them all." Zethric had heard similar stories thousands of times during his military career. Conquered beings always spoke of their losses, usually just before begging for mercy or offering to surrender. But this human was not begging, he was simply stating a fact. "Yet you take us prisoner instead of killing us," Zethric said. "Because that's what separates us from you." The words hit Zethric like a physical blow. He had expected hatred, demands for revenge, the kind of emotional breakdown that made conquered species easy to manage. Instead, this human who had lost everything was choosing to follow rules of conduct that his enemies did not respect. The fight that followed was unlike anything Zethric had experienced in 4 decades of warfare. Gary Phillips moved with a combination of training and desperate fury that made him dangerous beyond his primitive equipment. He used the forest itself as a weapon, turning every tree and rock into cover, every shadow into a potential ambush. Point:Zethric's cybernetic enhancements gave him superior strength and speed. But Phillips fought with something that technology could not replicate: the absolute conviction that some things were worth dying for. Every time Zethric gained an advantage, the human would do something impossible, something that defied tactical logic but somehow worked. When Phillips finally fell, wounded but not dead, Zethric stood over him, breathing heavily. The human soldier looked up at his captor without fear, without pleading, without any of the responses Zethric had learned to expect from defeated enemies. "Why?" Zethric asked. "Why do you fight when you know you cannot win?" Phillips smiled, blood running from a cut on his forehead. "Because someone has to." Those 4 words followed Zethric back to his flagship like an infection that his cybernetic systems could not cleanse. Someone has to. Not because victory was assured, not because the odds were favorable, not because there was any logical reason to hope for success, simply because someone has to. As rescue shuttles carried Zethric away from the forest, he realized that the humans had taught him something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting because the alternative was to let evil triumph unopposed. And somehow, that was enough to make them unbeatable. That night, as Zethric attempted to enter his regeneration cycle, the nightmares began in earnest. Not dreams of defeat or tactical failure, but visions of human faces filled with a light that no amount of darkness could extinguish. The evacuation order arrived on a day when Earth's sun seemed to burn brighter than usual, casting long shadows across the command deck of Zethrac's flagship. After 8 months of what had become the longest and most devastating campaign in Velonian history, the High Command had finally admitted the unthinkable. They were ordering a full withdrawal from Earth. Zethric read the message 3 times before its meaning fully penetrated his mind. In over 200 years of galactic conquest, the Velonian Empire had never retreated from a world, never abandoned a campaign, never admitted that any species could resist their might long enough to make occupation unprofitable, but the humans had changed everything. "Commander," Vorthek approached with his usual measured steps, but Zethric could see the relief in his subordinate's cybernetic eye. "The High Command is requesting immediate confirmation of withdrawal procedures." Zethric looked at the tactical display one final time. Red markers showed the locations of remaining Velonian forces scattered across the planet. Blue markers indicated human positions. The blue had spread like wildfire until it covered nearly every continent. Somehow, impossibly, the primitive species, with metal projectiles, had pushed the most advanced military force in the galaxy to the brink of total defeat. "Confirm the order," Zethric said quietly. "Begin immediate evacuation of all personnel." The next 72 hours should have been routine. Load equipment, evacuate wounded, destroy sensitive technology, and depart. Zethric had overseen dozens of tactical withdrawals during his career, but this was different. This was retreat, and the humans seemed determined to make every moment of it as difficult as possible. Instead of celebrating their victory or pursuing fleeing Velonian forces, the humans did something that confused and disturbed every warrior in the evacuation fleet. They began rebuilding immediately. Sandy Davis, a human medical worker, had somehow survived 8 months of warfare in what had once been the city of Boston. As Velonian transports lifted off from the ruins around her, she was already treating wounded civilians in a makeshift hospital built from salvaged materials. Zethric watched through his ship's sensors as Davis worked. She moved between patients with efficiency that rivaled Velonian medical technology, using primitive tools and basic supplies to save lives that advanced alien medicine might have written off as lost causes. "Why is she not taking shelter?" asked the sensors officer. Our evacuation route passes directly over her position. She knows we are leaving, Zethric replied. She is not afraid of us anymore. That was the most disturbing realization of all. After 8 months of orbital bombardment, ground assaults, and technological superiority, the humans were no longer afraid. They had learned to fight Valonian forces and win. They had adapted to alien technology faster than any species in recorded history. Most importantly, they had proven that courage and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. In the ruins of what had been Chicago, a teacher named Frank Wilson was already organizing groups of children to help clear debris from their destroyed school. Valonian forces had evacuated from that sector only hours earlier, but Wilson was not waiting for official approval or government assistance. He was simply doing what needed to be done. The human education systems were completely destroyed, reported the intelligence officer. Their governmental structures have collapsed in most regions. Yet they continue functioning as if nothing has changed. Zethric understood now why the High Command had ordered the withdrawal. It was not because Valonian forces could not continue fighting. They had enough firepower to turn the entire planet into molten glass. The retreat was happening because destroying humanity would require the Empire to become something monstrous, and even Supreme Commander Vortex was not prepared to cross that line. The humans had won by making themselves too valuable to destroy completely. But the most haunting scene came from a farming region that had been heavily contested throughout the campaign. A man named Roy Gibson, whose agricultural equipment had been destroyed in the 3rd month of fighting, was already planting crops in soil that still glowed faintly from plasma bombardment. The radiation levels in that area will make agriculture impossible for decades, Vorthak observed. He must know this. He knows, Zethric replied. He is planting anyway. Roy Gibson worked with tools that belonged in a museum, turning earth that had been burned and poisoned by alien weapons. But he worked with the same steady determination that every human had shown throughout the campaign. He was not planting for immediate harvest. He was planting for a future that might take generations to achieve. The act of hope represented by that single farmer affected Zethric more deeply than any battlefield victory could have. This human was declaring his faith that life would continue, that his world would heal, that tomorrow would be better than today despite everything the Valonians had done to prove him wrong. As the evacuation fleet prepared for final departure, Zethric received reports of human activity that defied every principle of post-conflict behavior. In regions that had been completely destroyed, humans were sharing resources with former enemies. Valonian wounded who had been left behind were being treated in human medical facilities alongside civilian casualties. They are caring for our injured, reported the medical officer with obvious confusion, using their limited supplies to treat warriors who tried to kill them. This was perhaps the most alien aspect of human behavior. Every other species the Valonians had conquered understood the logic of revenge. Defeated enemies were expected to seek retribution against their conquerors when the opportunity arose. But these humans seemed incapable of such rational hatred. Instead, they were demonstrating what their philosophical texts called mercy. Dr. Susan Mills, the same woman who had refused to abandon her patients during the siege of Seattle, was now organizing medical assistance for Valonian prisoners of war. She worked 18 hours a day treating injuries that Valonian weapons had inflicted on her own people, then spent the remaining 6 hours ensuring that captured aliens received equivalent care. Why? Zethric asked the empty air of his command. Center, why do they help those who tried to destroy them? No one answered because no one understood. Valonian military doctrine had no framework for analyzing behavior that was so completely contrary to survival logic. The final moment of revelation came asZethrac's flagship prepared to leave Earth's orbit. His sensors detected a small human spacecraft approaching the Valonian fleet. It was primitive even by human standards, clearly cobbled together from salvaged parts and held together by desperation and hope. Incoming transmission from the human vessel, reported the communications officer. The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the human craft. The pilot was a young woman whose face bore scars from plasma burns, but her eyes held the same unbreakable determination that Zethric had seen in every human fighter. "Valonian fleet, this is Captain Maria Santos of the Earth Defense Coalition," she said with formal military precision. "We wanted to speak with your commander." Zethric stepped forward, his scarred face filling the screen. "This is Commander Zethric." "What do you want, human?" "We want you to remember something," Santos replied. "You came here thinking we were weak because we fight among ourselves. You thought division made us vulnerable. But you were wrong about something important." Zethric waited, sensing that this moment would define how he remembered this campaign for the rest of his life. "We fight among ourselves because we care enough to fight for what we believe in," Santos continued. "We argue and disagree and sometimes hate each other because the things we protect matter enough to fight over. But when something threatens all of us, when something tries to destroy everything we love, we become something else entirely." The young pilot paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 8 months of impossible courage. "We become unified, we become unstoppable, and we become something you will never understand. We become willing to die for each other." The transmission ended, leaving Zethric alone with the truth that would haunt him across the light years back to Valonian space. Humanity had not defeated the Empire through superior technology or greater numbers. They had won by demonstrating something that no amount of cybernetic enhancement could replicate: the willingness to sacrifice everything for love. As Earth dwindled to a point of light behind the fleeing Valonian fleet, Zethric realized that the humans had accomplished something far more devastating than military victory. They had shown him what his own species had lost in their pursuit of galactic dominance. They had reminded him what it meant to be alive. The journey home would take weeks, but Zethric knew that no amount of distance could separate him from what he had witnessed. The humans would rebuild their world, tend to their wounded, plant crops in poisoned soil, and continue believing in tomorrow despite everything that had tried to destroy their faith. And somewhere in the depths of space, a Valonian commander, who had conquered 42 worlds, would spend the rest of his life wondering what it might feel like to be worth dying for. 4 months had passed since the fleet returned to Valonian space, and Zethric stood in the medical bay of the Imperial complex on the homeworld of Vorthek Prime. The walls were lined with the most advanced healing technology in the galaxy. Machines that could repair any physical damage and restore any bodily function. But they could not heal what was wrong with him. "Your cybernetic systems are functioning at optimal capacity," reported Dr. Xanath, the Empire's chief medical officer. "Neural pathways show no degradation. Muscular enhancement remains at peak efficiency. I can find no physical reason for your reported symptoms." Zethric sat on the examination table, his scarred hands resting on his knees. The symptoms were real even if the machines could not detect them. Sleep eluded him night after night. During the day, his mind wandered to memories of Earth when he should have been focusing on military briefings. Food tasted like ash, though his enhanced digestive system processed nutrients with mechanical efficiency. "The nightmares continue," Zethric said quietly. "Nightmares are a psychological condition that does not affect Valonian physiology, Doctor," Xanath replied with clinical precision. "Our conditioning protocols eliminate such weaknesses during childhood development." But Zethrac's conditioning had been shattered by 8 months of witnessing something that Valonian science had never anticipated: beings who became stronger through suffering rather than weaker. "Request assignment to new campaign," Zethric said. As he left the medical bay, the request was denied within hours. Instead, he was summoned to the office of Supreme Commander Vorthex, the same scarred warrior who had demanded victory over humanity months earlier. The office was a monument to Valonian conquest, walls covered with battle trophies from dozens of worlds, displays showing the expanding boundaries of the Empire, holographic recreations of famous victories. "Commander Zethric," Vorthex began, without looking up from his tactical displays, "your medical reports indicate you are physically capable of resuming active duty." "Yes, Supreme Commander." Yet you request assignment to campaigns against species we have already identified as inferior to the humans. Vortex finally turned to face Zethric, his cybernetic eye glowing with pale blue light. Explain this apparent lack of confidence. Zethric had rehearsed this conversation during the sleepless nights aboard his flagship. But standing before the most successful military commander in Valonian history, the practiced words seemed inadequate. The humans taught us something about warfare that our doctrine does not address, Zethric said carefully. And what is that? That some enemies become more dangerous when they are losing? Supreme Commander Vortex studied Zethric for a long moment. The older warrior had conquered more star systems than any other Valonian, had overseen the subjugation of entire galactic sectors, but he had not faced humanity. The humans are defeated, Vortex said. We withdrew to preserve resources, not because they posed a genuine threat to Imperial forces. With respect, Supreme Commander, we withdrew because they were changing us. The silence that followed stretched like the void between galaxies. Vortex's expression darkened with the displeasure that had reduced entire planets to radioactive. Dust, explain. Our warriors reported reluctance to engage human forces. Battle fatigue appeared in veterans who had never experienced psychological weakness. Medical staff requested transfers from units treating human prisoners. The humans were not just resisting conquest. They were inspiring doubt in our soldiers about the rightness of what we were doing. And you believe this ... infection ... affects your ability to command? Zethric thought of Gary Phillips, bleeding in a forest but still smiling as he spoke of duty that transcended victory. He remembered Sandy Davis treating wounded enemies with the same care she showed her own people. He recalled Roy Gibson planting crops in poisoned soil because hope mattered more than logic. I believe it affects my ability to be what the Empire needs me to be, Zethric replied. The conversation ended with Zethric assigned to administrative duties on Vorthek Prime. No more conquests. No more campaigns, no more opportunities to prove his worth as a warrior. He would spend his remaining years processing tactical reports and training younger commanders who would never know the terror of facing an enemy that fought for love. Instead of survival. But the dreams would not stop. Every night brought visions of Earth, not the burning cities or destroyed military installations, but the moments of human courage that had defined the campaign. Jake Morrison pulling survivors from collapsing buildings while plasma fire rained around him. Lisa Carter steering her dying fighter into a Valonian command ship. Kevin Brooks coordinating resistance networks while Imperial forces hunted him. Across continents, the worst dreams were the quiet ones. Dr. Susan Mills organizing medical care for prisoners of war. Frank Wilson teaching children in the ruins of their school. Maria Santos speaking of unity in the face of extinction. These humans had shown Zethric something that the Empire had forgotten in its pursuit of galactic dominance. The difference between existing and living, between surviving and thriving, between conquering and protecting. Weeks turned to months as Zethric struggled with knowledge that his conditioning could not suppress. He began accessing the Imperial archives, studying records of previous conquests with new understanding. Every campaign followed the same pattern. Overwhelming force applied until resistance collapsed, followed by efficient administration of the conquered territory. But the archives contained no records of species like humanity, no other conquered. People had continued fighting when victory was impossible. No other cultures had valued individual lives over tactical advantage. No other civilizations had treated their enemies with mercy. While those enemies were actively trying to destroy them, the humans were unique in the galaxy, and the Empire had been fortunate to encounter them when they were still primitive. In a few hundred years, when human technology caught up to their courage, they would become unstoppable. The realization that terrified Zethric most was not that humanity might one day threaten the Empire. It was that humanity had already changed him in ways that could never be reversed. Late at night, alone in his quarters overlooking the gray towers of the Imperial capital, Zethric found himself questioning everything he had been taught about strength and victory. The Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, enslaved thousands of species, built a civilization that spanned half the galaxy. But what did any of that matter if it was built on the destruction of beings like the humans? The humans had possessed something that all the Empire's technology could not create: the knowledge that some things were worth any sacrifice to protect. They had faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway, not because they expected to win, but because surrender would have meant abandoning everything that made life meaningful, standing at his window, watching ships prepare for new conquests. Of weaker species, Zethric understood why sleep no longer came easily. The humans had shown him that the Valonian Empire, for all its power and territory, was spiritually empty. They took worlds but created nothing. They conquered species but inspired no loyalty. They ruled through fear but commanded no love. In the deepest hours of night, when even the busy sounds of the imperial capital faded to whispers, Zethric would close his eyes and remember Earth, not the planet they had tried to conquer, but the world they had been driven from by people who refused to let darkness triumph. The humans were rebuilding now, he knew. Planting new crops, raising new children, dreaming new dreams. They would remember the invasion as a time of testing that had proven their worth to themselves and to the galaxy. They would grow stronger from the experience, more united, more determined to protect what they loved, and somewhere among the stars, in the coldest depths of space, former enemies would carry the memory of their courage. Like a flame that no amount of distance could extinguish, Zethric had conquered 42 worlds in the name of the Valonian Empire. But on the 43rd world, humanity had conquered him with something far more powerful than plasma weapons or energy shields. They had conquered him with hope. Even now, months after leaving Earth behind, Zethric could feel that hope burning in his chest like a star that refused to die. It whispered to him during the dark hours, reminding him that somewhere in the galaxy, beings existed who would fight impossible odds to protect those they loved. The night would never bring him peace again. But perhaps that was as it should be. Perhaps some lights were meant to burn forever, illuminating truths too important to forget. In the distance, another Valonian fleet prepared for departure to conquer another defenseless world. Zethric watched them go and wondered if they would be as fortunate as he had been, fortunate to meet beings who had shown him what it truly meant to be alive.